Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Candidates 2022, an 8-player double round robin tournament being held in Madrid in Spain. A couple of things right off the bat. My voice is going to be a little bit lower in this recap because we have some guests over and I don't want to disturb them. But the last move of the last game was played literally 2 minutes ago. So I'm sitting right here. I've got everything ready to go. Already analyzed everything I want to talk to you about. Thank you for your support. In recap video number 1, over 300,000 views in 24 hours. Honestly, means the world to me. Thanks for getting involved in the comments. And we will have a different and unique shirt for every episode of the recaps. No more tank tops. Folks, we've got a lot of different storylines. We're going to see if Nepo and Fabi can build off of their momentum winning in round number 1. We're going to see if Dingley, Ren, and Hikaru can bounce back. Timestamps are on the video player. Let's jump right into it. I'm going to take you through all of the critical moments of the opening, middle game, and end game. And a big motorcycle outside. E4, E5, and we have an Italian, D3, Bishop C5. And nowadays, the top level guys are basically mixing a lot of different move orders here. They're playing C3, sometimes they're playing a pawn to A4, taking queenside space in B4. Sometimes black plays A6, sometimes black plays A5, preventing B4. Sometimes black will castle, sometimes black doesn't castle. Sometimes white goes out this way. This knight either goes here or rotates all over the place. So the move order of the opening isn't the most important thing, but we do have an interesting moment as early as right here, because Fabi hasn't castled. And this position has been played before by many top players. White now can either expand on the queen side or play knight d2 and then maybe bring this knight over here and then offer a bishop trade. You're really expecting black to castle in this position. But after knight bd2, Fabi played g5. Now this is already a statement. Fabiano is not going to just play for a draw with black. He's trying to beat Nepo with black. That's why he played g5. You don't play g5 if you want to make a quick draw. Maybe the game ends in a draw, but not quickly. g5 is a very provocative move. And it gets even more provocative when Nepo plays the best move, which is b4. The first time this was ever played was by Wei Yi with black against Vishwanathan Anand in 2016. But Karyakin, Sergei Karyakin, Russian grandmaster, at this point kind of notorious as well, actually should be playing in this Candidates, but that's an entirely separate story. Played the move b4. He was actually the first person to do that. Now in this position, black has played knight h5 as well as g4, castling, but we have a novelty. On move 10, this move has never been played. It is a very natural move, but this approach has never ever occurred. Black puts the queen into the attack, but blocks his own pawns. What is Fabiano trying to do here? Well, there's ideas. He wants to take on f2, then continue playing with g4. So queen e1, safeguarding the f2 pawn. And now this queen rotation back to g7. What? This is very interesting plan here by Fabiano Caruana. Knight f1 played. Maybe something is going to go to e3 or to g3. And by this point in the game, Nepo, who is a super fast player, frequently up tons of time against his opponents, is down nearly 1 hour on the clock. And keep in mind, the time control is 2 hours and 40 minutes 2 hours for the first 40 moves, an hour for the next 20 moves, and then they get 15 minutes after that. So he's down a lot on time. And he so desperately wanted to get out of his opponent's preparation that after lunging forward with his center pawn, because he was, I guess, anticipating something like this. You know, you give black like 2 moves in this position, he's going to play for f5. And I mean, this is really scary. Like, this is not something you want to be caught out in down an hour on the clock. So Nepo is so desperate here to get out of his opponent's preparation that he sacrifices a rook. A pawn. He moves his rook. There's no sacrifice of a rook here. You find a way black can capture a rook here, I'll give you $1 million in one move. Rook a3. So he moves the rook and he gives away d4 completely, and all hell breaks loose. Craziness. Absolutely insane. I told you Fabi played this system with the intention of not playing for a quick draw. What is the point? Like, why would you just give that pawn away? Well, you now boot this knight, okay? And after the knight goes to e5, basically what Nepo is saying is, I'm going to get here first. So I'm going to get my knight to f5. We're going to trade, and then I'm actually going to take over the attack. So you can play c5. You can do all that. I'm going to trade that. I'm going to move my rook over. All right, b5. Here comes the knight to f5. And we get this position. Now, Stockfish always prefers the position for black because black is up a pawn. Stockfish doesn't know the clock situation, but Stockfish is just like, well, black is up a pawn. But Nepo develops some pretty decent counterplay here, sacrificing a second pawn. He's down 2 pawns cleanly. No, like, he's just down 2 pawns. But what does he have for those 2 pawns? A brewing attack. Rook a3 turns out to be absolutely brilliant by Nepo because it causes Fabiano to begin thinking. And that is a dangerous thing. The truth is, being in your prep is much more comfortable than having to think outside of it, especially when your opponent is capable of causing nonsense to happen on the board. But, I mean, not the nonsense you and I cause. This is brilliant nonsense. This is genius level nonsense. You know, you ever go to a museum, you look at a painting, everyone's like, wow. You're like, I don't understand. It looks like my 6-year-old niece could have done that. Or nephew. I don't know which one of them is a better painter. But it's just like, it's one of these things. This is beautiful nonsense. Look at this. Both bishops, knight, rook. This rook is like, and the queen are ready to get involved, maybe with f4 and transferring over this way at some point. So Fabiano is still better, but it's not clear at all. And these 2 A-pawns, who are they intimidating? I mean, one can't shove the other out of the way, okay? So that's basically what ends up happening throughout this game. That knight finally gets captured. You might be asking, why wasn't it captured earlier? Well, so what if you capture it earlier? It's not like you're going to play queen f5. You're just going to give me this. You now have another direct line of attack toward the king. And what happens in this game is we get to a moment right here when we have this position. Applying a little bit more pressure here. Fabiano plays rook e8, and Nepo re-threatens the pawn on g5 due to this pin. Fabiano repeats, and Nepo re-threatens this knight, and Fabi here has 10 minutes for the next like 7-8 moves. Remember the time control. Stockfish wants Fabi to sacrifice the rook, and it thinks that black is better, but it's not easy at all. I mean, you basically get here, you allow the rook to the 7th rank, and Stockfish says gobble this pawn, minus 1.1. Human beings don't think like that. We don't think, oh, it's minus 1.1. We think, well, did I just do more harm than good here? Like, look at white's position. Everything is swarming. Stockfish is not convinced by white's position. It thinks that black is better. But instead of that, as you can see what's happening, the players shuffle their pieces and repeat moves and make a draw. Fabi takes a calculated risk. Naturally, he did see rook takes b2. He evaluated that it wasn't worth going for. Can you blame the guy? He's in first place after 1 round. Very combative, interesting draw with black. Never really suffering any danger. I respect it. All right, I know everybody wants blood every single round. That doesn't always happen. The next game that I have for you is Jan Krzysztof Duda versus Ding Liren. This one also beginning with a very similar move order to the last game, but this one c3 first. Okay, now we have d6. You'll notice in the last game that black had moved this a-pawn and went back to a7 already, but he played a6, right? If we go back to this game, the pawn was on a6 for a while. So the move order here is slightly different. Okay, now the pawn's on a5. Right, h6. You'll also notice that Ding Liren has castled, so there's probably not going to be a g5. These players follow a super mainline tabia here for a while. Black is threatened with a doubling of his queenside pawns, and here plays a most interesting move. Just a move that no beginner could... It's just an inconceivable move for anybody below 2400, and I'm 2330 elo. I mean, I'm just saying it's an absolutely fascinating move here, queen b8. The whole point of queen b8 is to anticipate the opening of the queenside and preventing expansion and maybe transferring the queen forward. But also the idea of queen b8 is that if white were to not take or to delay taking a significant amount, black's queen goes around, teams up with the bishop to hit f2, okay? Rook e2 is defending that. Now black plays a4, taking a little bit of space. Duda here plays knight g3, kind of jumping out to that side of the board. Okay, we have this. And now we have this exchange. So this queen did an entire journey, okay, all the way out this way. This whole position has occurred before. Everything here has occurred before. I think here white has played knight h4 in like 10 games in the database by very good players. Duda plays a novelty. So no one's ever played this move. It's not a crazy move. It's not like a, right? But this is the first moment in the game that's brand new. Just like Fabi played knight g4. This is a new idea, right? So Ding thinks for a little bit, retreats his bishop, and I guess, you know, maybe anticipates moving the pawns future in the center. You know, maybe he's anticipating c4 attacking the queen and going back. So queen c2 is played, and now c4. And now the players are completely on their own. Neither one of them knows how to handle this position. They have to figure it out, right? So the queen is kicked out, the bishop goes to c3. At some point in all these same side king positions, someone starts to move their pawns. And what Duda begins doing here is transferring a few of his pieces, preparing a couple of pawn breaks. He plays rook d2, playing for d4, and Ding Liren goes here. This looks like the world's most anti-positional, absurd, bogus move that no human being should ever play, because what are you doing to your bishop? But it's completely necessary. You have to prevent d4. So now, Duda's like, well, rook f1. What do you think he's preparing? Do you think he's preparing to go something like this? Well, Ding Liren is ready. He's like, all right, come and get me. Look how solid Ding Liren's position is. A couple of moves later, when this happens, and it's very clear we want to go here, Ding Liren plays g5. And I made a tweet here. I was like, looks like he's playing checkers. But I mean, you're just preventing f4, and you're preventing d4. So finally, Duda gets a breakthrough, and he goes for b4. But isn't that playing directly into black's hands? Like, aren't you... We just talked about how that was not a good bishop, right? So what does Ding do? Ding's like, well, I don't even have to take. I mean, if you take me, my bishop's getting active, right? So I'm going to take you en passant. I'm going to get rid of my weak a-pawn. So now my rook is open. All right, my rook is open. You're going for my bishop. Well, my bishop is totally safe. Ding just has a rock-solid formation. White has absolutely no pawn breaks, right? If White tries to, like, really get a pawn break, he's going to lose a pawn. He's going to open up his own king. So Ding is just a brick wall in this game. I mean, everything perfectly defended. White has absolutely no way through. No way through. And if anybody can take over the initiative, perhaps it's Ding, because he has a pawn break. He can play f5. And several moves later, that is exactly what he does. That pawn is being escorted by 4 different pieces. This is a very problematic position for White. White has to be super careful here. So he makes a couple of exchanges and gets his knight out to g3. Bishop goes back to c8. Now, again, you give Ding a couple of moves, like you do nothing. Ding will go here. Ding will open e4. Suddenly the bishops come alive. Suddenly maybe this rook will get doubled on the f-file. So it's now time for damage control. Bishop e3 prevents the move d5. You want what your opponent wants? You prevent it because the c5 pawn will fall. So king g7. This is virtually a draw offer, and it gets accepted. Why is it a draw offer? Because the players have the opportunity to repeat moves. Now, Ding Liren might have not had to do this, but again, it's move 39. And their time was about even throughout the game. And Duda said after this game that he was unhappy. He was not satisfied with this game. You know, he felt like he tried to go for a new opening idea, but he himself, Duda, after the game said, I didn't really understand it that well. I couldn't figure out how to play the position. I mean, that's going to happen, right? Like, that's just high-level chess. I mean, Ding just played the position super well. He played this queen b8 line. White was trying to push for an initiative or an advantage with a new idea, and Ding just shut him down. I mean, really, like c5, okay? And then a few moves later, f6 and g5. Just an encroaching, nasty pawn structure, taking away your heir here. And, well, Duda tried. And actually, if anybody took over the initiative, as I said, it was Ding. But luckily, Duda's structure was sound, and to prevent Ding from getting out with d5, you know, Duda didn't play something like this and allow this move. This would have completely taken over the game. Very nice idea, anticipating d5, covering this, and that's it. And the game ends in a draw by repetition of moves after 41 moves. So a draw between those two. Ding on the board, half out of 2. Duda continues with the second draw in the candidates. And that brings me to my next game, which is between Richie Rapport and Alireza Firouzja. This one's super exciting already, because in this position, we do not go into the territory of a Najdorf Sicilian, we go into the territory of queen takes d4, which used to be a bogus move. If you played this move, they would tie a brick to your shoe and throw you in the water. That's what they did in Salem witch trials. That is what they did in chess witch trials. You cannot play this move. This is a ludicrous move. Black is just going to hit the queen and get development. That's exactly what he does. But now White is getting development too. White is pinning the knight. And what I know to be the main line here is bishop d7 to block the pin. But Alireza says, nope, take me. Take me now. You got to take me. You have no choice. You know, maybe you can play queen a4, pin my pawn to my rook. But, you know, this happens. And now something really funny happens. This pawn structure is the same thing Rapport faced yesterday. Yesterday, Rapport had e6, knight e7, and g6, but he was black. Rapport in this game plays the exact same pawn break that Duda played against him. Do you remember that? But in that game, there was a dark squared bishop out, and there was dark squared weaknesses. In this game, what happens is he gets this structure. It's the same structure as we had yesterday, but there is a major difference. If you remember the game yesterday, in that game, it was not an imbalance of minor pieces. In that game, the pieces were the same. In this game, Alireza has a light squared bishop, which means he's never worse. Okay, in the game yesterday, black and white had the same exact pieces on the board. There was no bishop for knight trade. So he gets the same structure, but he doesn't get the same material. But okay, I mean, you still have to play chess, right? You'll notice that Alireza here finds a nice configuration for his pieces. His king is safe here. He doesn't have to castle. If he castled, which probably is also okay, his king is further from the center, and it's the endgame. The king actually prefers to be a little closer to the center, if anything, right? But the king could go to g8, doesn't really matter, okay? Knight d3, and you'll notice that, well, Rapport is playing against the weaknesses that he himself had last game. He brings his king over, right? Alireza trying to force some dynamics onto the board, and Alireza goes for the g2 pawn, and Rapport improves his opponent's structure, but boots out the knight and now begins saying, we have opposite colored bishops here, but you have a weakness, okay? Your pawn on b4 is a liability, okay? And I'm gonna now play a3 and get to an endgame where I am trying to have an outside pass pawn, okay? Outside passer, a pawn. That pawn is gonna be a nightmare for black to try to defend as all my pieces look to escort it to a promotion square, right? That's the point. That's what we are trying to do. So let's back up. Obviously, Alireza doesn't really want that. Now we have a knight versus bishop endgame. And for the next like 20 moves, Rapport is just trying to win this endgame. In endgames like this, a couple of things matter. Number one, what do you want to simplify? Are you trying to trade 1 rook, 2 rooks, or 0 rooks? Are you trying to trade a bishop for a knight? Are you trying to trade a bishop for a knight and a rook? How are you trying to win this pawn, and how are you trying to defend this pawn? And when you simplify, which rook endgames and minor piece endgames are winning, right? King activity is important. Pawn structure, super important as well, which is why Rapport in this position trades the bishop for the knight and gets into an endgame where that pawn is a liability. And as the players go into time trouble, there's 8 more moves until move 40. Alireza blunders with rook a1 and rook h1. He goes fully active on the back rank here to try to get this pawn, and Rapport is winning. Rapport has 15 minutes versus 2. If he thinks here for a brief moment, in this position, he has a win. The win, according to the machine, is to play the move b4, ignoring the checks. And when black tries to get this with check, you play the absurd, you could play rook g7 now, by the way. It's just good to include this move if you really want to. But you can also play, to get out of check, king c4 apparently. And the point is that this move now surrenders the h7 pawn with tempo, and the b pawn runs. This pawn, d3, is always stopped like this. This is what Stockfish said, don't shoot the messenger. Rapport blunders. Rapport rushes the process, and now, again, according to the analysts and according to the machine, we've made 40 moves. No one's lost on time, but white went the wrong way. Rapport went the wrong way. The pawn never got moving, and since this pawn is not involved in the game, that pawn is the star. That pawn must decide this game. At some point, white is close to this king, and white can try to win that pawn and get a winning rook endgame. So Rapport is winning. Maybe. Like, only he can pose problems. Why? Much better piece coordination, much more venomous pawn, right? Because d3 can always just be stopped. I said rook d7, and the pawn is completely cut. So everything in Rapport's favor here. Okay. So Alireza tries to defend himself. Couple of checks here. Rapport doesn't repeat moves. That's not a repetition. He ends up winning this pawn. Okay? Rook e2, going for the b pawn and also escorting this. Rapport pushes the e pawn. Rook e8 trying to win it. Check here. Check back. How do we win this position? Well, here's your moment. I think here Alireza had to play rook g8. This is what Stockfish said. Or d3 right away. Of course, it's just an insane endgame. I mean, you have to calculate just... First of all, black is like on the verge of mate. Like at any moment, black might just get mated. Like if you push, it's like check, king g8, check here, check, and then you lose the rook. Like if you're just like not careful. And the worst part about this, like this whole situation, I check you first, and then you lose your rook, and then you never queen. Wonderful. So black is on the verge of death constantly. Rook g8 here, and d3 draw, but rook e7 apparently. And credit to the Norwegian international master who drew Magnus, Geir Sune, his last name Osmo or something like that. He posted an unbelievable line here I saw on social media, so credit to him. King f5 here is the winning move. And the winning line goes d3, rook back to g1, d2, and then this move. This threatens mate. Rook h6, king here, and here. So the only defense is rook f2. White goes around this way, right? And now in this position, black has the defense, rook h7. Because if you take the rook, rook e1 is a shield for the queen. This is insanity. So you don't take the rook, you give a check, Black can't block because this is a winning rook endgame, and white goes here, and this is the winning configuration. Report had to find this like 14 move sequence for both players. King f5, bringing back the rook, check, doubling, and then dancing to d6, and then, I mean, he didn't find it. He played b4. And now this is a pawn race, and this pawn race is just a draw. This just goes to show you how insane this game is. Like, Report is, Farouj is just in time. Just in the nick of time. He just hung around, he hung around, and Report got a little hasty, and this is just a drawn rook endgame because the pawn is just stopped completely. So, like, it can be stopped from either side. I mean, and the king is too close, the rook is too close, and the players agree to a draw. You can trade into a king and pawn endgame. This is still a draw. So, 3 draws, combative, winning chances here and there, but if you had the patience to make it this far in the recap, boy, do I have a treat for you. Hikaru started the candidates, obviously, in a way that he wouldn't have liked, with a loss, right? So he's looking to bounce back against Timur Rajabov. Timur yesterday was down about an hour, maybe 50 minutes on the clock to Firouzja. He's going to try to not be down an hour, 50 minutes on the clock versus Hikaru. Hikaru plays the anti-Berlin. We're going to see a lot of anti-Berlins. We're going to see a lot of these structures where a lot of pawns and pieces stay on the board. You'll notice that in the game between Caruana and Nepo in the opening, we had a lot of flexibility in terms of the e4-e5 structure. The same thing happened in the game between Jan Krzysztof Duda and Ding Liren, right? A lot of flexibility here. The same thing happens here, d3, and this anti-Berlin, instead of bishop takes c6, Hikaru plays by far the 4th most popular move, knight bd2. Nobody plays that. Like, if you don't take this knight right now, black is going to move it, hitting the bishop, and now we have a position where, why is the bishop on b5, right? Like, what's it doing there? It went there to put pressure on the knight. But this is a line, and this is one of the ways you can try to test black's theoretical knowledge. So Hikaru kicks out the bishop and doesn't castle, but plays d4. Oh my. Oh wow. The bishop now has a retreat. Okay, so the best line here is not to take. If you take e5, you get blasted. So c6, all right? Now Hikaru doesn't retreat. He takes the pawn, gives up his bishop, he takes the knight, and now he castles. This position has been reached only one time ever, and it was reached by Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces versus someone in the chess.com online rapids, like the rapid championship. And in that game, queen h5 was played, and that's exactly what happened in this game. In that game, Nepo played knight f3. In this game, Hikaru plays the top engine move, which is rook e1. That is incredible. An incredible display of preparation from Hikaru, who saw the only game ever played in an online rapid event and improved upon it. And now Rajabov has to prove his defenses, okay? He has a little bit of a damaged structure, but he has the bishop pair, right? He can play in the style of the Marshal, and he does. What he does here is completely gives away the pawn on d5. It can be taken with the queen or the pawn. If you trade queens here, black gets what's called Marshal compensation. Bishop f5, rook d8 looking for this. It's a very complicated position. Hikaru chooses to win the pawn this way. So now he's up a pawn, but he has to catch up in the turn, on the elements of development here, rook e8. And we have this position where Rajabov is trying to get the pawn back, right? Hikaru's like, nah, you can't get me. Hikaru here could have played rook d1. I suppose that there's a pawn hanging here. I mean, Hikaru also is a far superior player than I could ever be. So I imagine he probably, maybe rook f5 is a move here that's kind of annoying. And then white can maybe play rook d4. We have like this insane line, rook f3, rook c4, rook e3, rook c7, rook e1, king f2. This is hanging, the rook goes there. So you have to calculate like just an immense amount of moves into the future into a rook endgame that may or may not be a win, may or may not be a draw. Hikaru chooses to do it like this. And I think around here is where I left the game. And I think I was sweeping the floor, which is not a very interesting activity, but unfortunately has to be done. Yeah, there's this endgame with a goofy structure, like doubled B pawns, right? White trying to kind of harass over here, maybe knight d4's pawn is a beast. Okay, Hikaru's like just trying to build behind the pawn, and rook c7, rook d6, rook b7. So now 3-on-2, right? White is trying to go knight d4, play a good knight versus bad bishop endgame. Queenside majority endgames are very difficult to defend because if you've castled on the same side and you just have like this harassment of your pawns constantly, you're really playing to lose. Like, it's incredibly difficult to defend the position. Now, as we make progress throughout this game, we see kind of the 3-on-2 here, but it's different because White's king is right there, ready for the pawns to come down. Now, right around this very moment, okay, I'm about to tell you, right around here, Timur Rajabov on move 35 has 1 minute. Timur has 1 minute to play the next 6 moves. 1 minute, no bonus time. He has to play his moves instantly. So what does he do? He plays rook d5, playing for a trick. Knight takes bishop, rook e5. Hikaru, rook c6. That's a fork, check. Here, bishop goes out of the way, giving up the a6 pawn. Pawn takes, rook e4. And now one more move each. Rook d6 attacks the bishop gets out of the way. Timur Rajabov played his last move with 2 seconds on the clock. But now he gets more time to defend this endgame. White now has a 3-on-1, but he might lose this, and he might win this and get a 3-on-0 and a 2-on-0. Hikaru spends the next time control trying to figure out exactly what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. Now, the truth is you could probably make a 1-hour video on this endgame, but you're already like 27 minutes into this video. You just want to see whether or not he won it. Timur really defended well. I mean, he put up like the most fortress-like defense imaginable, and it takes some technique here. You'll notice it looks like White is not making any progress. The truth is that Hikaru is probably trying to create a plethora of threats and ultimately break through when Rajabov does not have an hour on the clock. That might be it, that might not be it, but you have to remember the time control gives everybody more time, right? So 3-on-1, slowly build. Now the pawn's been taken. So now this pawn will fall as well. Now it's a 3-on-0 and there's not a lot of time to defend it, right? Rook h2, king to g3, active defense, also hitting this. Visually, this probably is winning, but it's a lot less easy than it seems. c4, and now we begin the march. But here's the thing, okay? We need to march with 2 pawns. Because the rook can just stand back and immediately like laser beam somebody, and it can harass the king. And if you walk the king over there, you know who's going to walk? The h-pawn. This endgame is anything but easy. Okay, it's one thing to look at the Stockfish evaluation and beg for moves, but it's Hikaru who is now a runaway freight train on the queen side. Rajabov is trying, but you just can't. I mean, the pawns are connected. That's the problem, and the bishop is out of the game. Beautiful job by Hikaru of totally shielding the bishop. The bishop's just not allowed to participate while the rook guards the knight, which guards the pawn, which guards the other pawn, and that pawn is going. So this is also a really, really very nice move, and black is in Zugzwang. Black cannot make any move basically here. King f2 is a super professional move. If you rush with pushing, rook a1 comes and you have to guard like this. So you do it this way, and oops, suddenly this. And Rajabov decides to sacrifice his bishop to go for the promotion. The problem is there is knight e2 check, but you don't win the rook. You do not win the rook and allow the queen. No, you go here. And you're ready to sacrifice your own knight because you have 3 pawns. Instead of that, we get here. Rajabov gives up the pawn h2 completely, but the pawn runs anyway and is defended. Rook b7, and in this position, Rajabov resigned because there is nothing left. Knight c8 is coming to defend the pawn. The rook will go to b8. You can give me a check. I will go here. So knight e7, and on move 75, Rajabov resigned, and Hikaru Nakamura picks up his first win in the candidates. That is a massive bounce-back moment. After 2 rounds, Jan Nepomniachtchi and Fabiano Caruana are in first place with 1.5 out of 2, but who cares about the standings? We have 12 more rounds to go. Hikaru has provided us the most fireworks with a loss in round 1 and a win in round 2. This man, whatever you might think about him, his chess, or his chances in this tournament, this man has come to play. This man is showing up and showing out. And if we can have games like this every single round, minus the repetitions maybe, oh, it's going to be a wonderful candidates. Folks, thank you. Appreciate y'all very much. Thank you for your support throughout these recaps. Yeah, the energy, the buzz is amazing. And if you have a friend or someone you know who doesn't really know chess or is interested in it, send them one of these recaps or send them Game 6 of the World Championship recap, because those are some of my favorites. So I'll catch you for round number 3. You know what to do. Get out of here.